Story 1: The Airbnb Host. I travel a lot for work, and over the years I've stayed in plenty of hotels, motels, and Airbnbs. I've always been cautious. I lock the doors, check the windows, and read reviews before booking. But no amount of caution prepared me for what happened last summer. I was driving cross-country for a conference and booked a small Airbnb in a quiet suburban neighborhood. The pictures looked nice. A clean, modest room, a private bathroom, and a friendly host who lived in the main part of the house. The reviews all mentioned how kind and accommodating he was. When I arrived, the host was waiting for me on the porch. He looked normal enough, maybe late 40s, neatly dressed, overly cheerful. He carried my bag inside and gave me a quick tour. The place smelled faintly of lemon cleaner, almost too strong, like he had scrubbed every surface an hour before. "Make yourself at home," he said, smiling a little too wide. "And don't hesitate to knock if you need anything." The first night was fine. I showered, unpacked a little, and watched TV before going to bed. But at around 2 a.m., I woke up to a faint buzzing sound. It was rhythmic, almost like a low hum. I figured it was the AC kicking on, so I tried to ignore it. But then I noticed a small red dot glowing near the bookshelf. I got up to check, and my stomach dropped. Hidden between two books was a camera lens, the little red light blinking faintly. I felt a rush of adrenaline. I started scanning the room and found two more. One tucked into the air vent, another angled from the corner near the ceiling. My skin crawled. I was being recorded. I wanted to storm out right then, but it was the middle of the night. I told myself to wait until morning. I barely slept, lying there with my heart pounding, every creak in the house making me flinch. The next day, I confronted the host. I tried to stay calm as I asked him about the cameras. He looked at me blankly, then chuckled. "Oh, those aren't cameras, just sensors. For the smoke alarms and air circulation. Old house, old systems." I didn't believe him, but his tone was so casual, so dismissive, that I started to doubt myself. Maybe I was overreacting. That night, I decided to test it. I covered the vents with towels and knocked the sensor off the bookshelf, hiding it under my suitcase. 3 a.m., I woke up again. But this time, it wasn't from a buzzing noise. It was from movement. The door to my room was slowly opening. I froze, pretending to sleep, my breathing shallow. Through half-closed eyes, I saw the host's silhouette standing in the doorway. He didn't say a word. He just stood there, watching. After what felt like an eternity, he closed the door and walked away. I didn't sleep after that. At dawn, I packed my things and left, making up some excuse about a family emergency. He smiled politely as I checked out, but his eyes followed me all the way to my car. When I got home, I decided to check the Airbnb listing again, just to warn others with a review. But the listing was gone, deleted, completely wiped from the site. I figured maybe he had been reported and shut down. I tried to forget about it. But a week later, I received an email from an unknown sender. No subject line, no text, just an attachment. It was a video. The thumbnail alone made my stomach drop. It was me, in that Airbnb room, asleep in bed. The camera angle was high, like it was mounted in the corner. I didn't want to open it, but I couldn't stop myself. The video showed me tossing and turning, unaware of being watched. Then, around 3 a.m., the door creaked open. The host stepped inside. But what chilled me wasn't just him entering the room. It was what he was carrying. A large kitchen knife. He walked up to the bed and just stood there, hovering over me, watching me sleep. For minutes. At one point, he raised the knife slightly, then lowered it again like he was debating something. Finally, he left the room. The video ended. I deleted the email instantly, but the image burned into my mind. I never told anyone. I didn't call the police because I didn't even know where to start. I had no proof except that video, which was now gone. But every night since, I wake up around 3 a.m. My eyes dart to the doorway, half expecting to see him standing there again, smiling, holding that knife. And sometimes I swear I hear the sound of a door slowly creaking open. Story 2: The Whispering Radio. I live alone in a one-bedroom apartment on the second floor of an older building. It's not the kind of place you'd brag about. Thin walls, creaky pipes, neighbors who argue loudly, but it's affordable and close to my job. I'm used to the little quirks that come with living in an older place. But about 6 months ago, something started happening that I still can't explain. It began with the radio. I've always been into collecting old electronics, nothing fancy, just thrift store finds. One weekend, I came across a beat-up radio from the 70s at a yard sale. It was small, boxy, with a cracked dial and a heavy static hum. I bought it for $5, thinking it'd be a cool decoration for my desk. I never actually plugged it in because the cord was frayed. It just sat there collecting dust. Then, one night, I woke up to the sound of static. At first, I thought it was my phone acting up. But when I turned my head, the sound was clearly coming from the radio. My stomach tightened. The radio wasn't plugged in. I sat up, staring at it in the dark. The static rose and fell, like someone was slowly tuning through channels. Then, for just a second, I heard a whisper. Said my name. I froze, heart hammering. I told myself I was half asleep and imagining things. I shoved the radio into my closet, closed the door, and eventually fell back asleep. But the next night, it happened again. This time, the static came earlier, around 2:45 in the morning. I tried to ignore it, pulling the pillow over my head. But then the whisper came again, clearer. Don't look behind you. I sat bolt upright, every nerve in my body on fire. The room felt colder, heavier. Against my better judgment, I turned. There was nothing there, just the shadows stretching across the walls. I barely slept the rest of the night. The next morning, I pulled the radio out of the closet and threw it into the dumpster behind the building. I felt stupid, but I figured that would be the end of it. It wasn't. That night, the static came back. I sat up in bed, confused, until I realized the sound was coming from inside my room. My eyes darted to my desk. The radio was there. I swear on my life I had thrown it away. The static grew louder. This time, the whisper wasn't faint. It was sharp, urgent. Get out. I stumbled out of bed, my heart racing, and unplugged every electronic in the room. Even though the radio wasn't plugged in, the static didn't stop. I grabbed the radio, ran outside, and hurled it into the street. It hit the pavement with a sickening crack. The sound finally stopped. For 2 nights, everything was quiet. I started convincing myself it had just been stress, sleep deprivation, maybe even some weird neighbor interference. Then I checked my phone. I had forgotten that on the 3rd night, I had left my phone recording, hoping to capture proof of the sound. When I opened the file, my blood went cold. At first, it was the familiar hiss of static. Then, slowly, a voice emerged. My name repeated over and over. But the part that made me drop the phone was this. The voice was mine, not someone else mimicking me, not distorted. It was my own voice, whispering my name like I was standing right next to the microphone. I deleted the file instantly, but deleting it didn't make the memory go away. Since then, I haven't slept properly. I moved the radio again. This time, I drove 10 miles out of town and left it in a field by the side of the road. That was 3 weeks ago. But last night, at 3:07 a.m., I woke to the sound of static again, louder than ever. I turned my head toward the corner of the room, and there it was, the radio, sitting on my desk. This time, I didn't touch it. I just sat frozen, listening as the static shifted into whispers. And what it whispered made my skin crawl. We found you. Story 3. The night shift at the gas station. I've been working the night shift at a gas station just off a lonely stretch of highway for almost 3 years now. People always ask me how I can stand it. The isolation, the silence, the weird customers who wander in at 3 a.m. The truth is, I've always preferred the quiet hours. But one night about 6 months ago, something happened that nearly made me quit on the spot. It was a Tuesday night, around 2:15 in the morning. I was sitting behind the counter with my phone, scrolling to stay awake. The lot outside was empty, not a single car at the pumps. The hum of the fluorescent lights and the faint buzz of the drink cooler were the only sounds. Then, through the glass front doors, I saw someone approaching. It was strange, because I hadn't heard a car pull up. The man was tall, thin, and dressed in dark clothes. He walked slowly across the lot, his head tilted slightly downward, like he was studying the ground. When he reached the doors, he just stopped and stood there, staring at me through the glass. I waited for him to come in, but he didn't. He just stood there. I gave a small wave, trying to be polite, but he didn't respond. He just kept staring. His face was pale and gaunt, his eyes shadowed in a way that made them look almost hollow. I finally stood up and called out, "We're open. You can come in." Nothing. He pressed one hand against the glass, leaving a faint smudge, and leaned forward just a little. His mouth twitched like he wanted to smile, but it never fully formed. I felt this cold weight settle in my chest. I thought about calling the police, but what would I even say? A guy is standing outside? After about a full minute of this, he suddenly turned and walked toward the side of the building, out of my view. I stepped out from behind the counter and leaned to try to see where he went. The lot was empty again. No car, no footsteps, nothing. It was as if he'd just vanished. I locked the doors. For the next 10 minutes, I tried to convince myself it was just some weirdo messing around. I poured a cup of coffee, tried to shake it off. That's when I heard the knock. It wasn't on the front doors. It came from the back storage room. I froze. The storage room had no outside entrance, just a locked steel door leading deeper into the store. My heart started hammering. I tried to tell myself maybe something had fallen over, maybe it was the ice machine, anything but what it sounded like, a deliberate knock. 3 slow raps. I grabbed the phone and dialed 911. I whispered into the receiver that someone was inside the building. The operator told me to stay on the line and stay calm. Then the knocking came again, louder. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe. I just kept staring at that door, waiting for it to swing open. The operator asked me if I could get out of the building. I told her the man from earlier might still be outside. She told me officers were on their way. 2 minutes later, I heard movement behind the storage room door. Slow, dragging footsteps, like someone pacing in the dark. I was shaking so badly that I dropped the phone. It clattered to the floor, and as I bent to grab it, the footsteps stopped. Silence. And then, in a low, raspy voice, I heard words through the door. "I like watching you." I swear my blood turned to ice. My throat closed up, and I couldn't even scream. Red and blue lights flashed across the parking lot moments later. The police banged on the front door, and I rushed to unlock it, nearly collapsing into their arms. I tried to explain through my panic what had happened. They swept the building. The storage room was locked from the inside. They pried it open, and there was nothing. No one. But the officers found something that made my stomach twist. In the corner of the storage room, hidden behind stacks of soda cases, was a small hole in the drywall. Behind it, in the dark cavity of the wall, they found a blanket, food wrappers, and a tiny collection of personal items. A toothbrush, a lighter, a crumpled photograph of a woman I didn't recognize. Someone had been living in the walls of the gas station. The police never caught the man. After that night, I transferred to the day shift. I still drive past that gas station sometimes, late at night, and I swear I can see someone standing by the doors, waiting. Story 4. The House in the Woods. A few years ago, I rented a cabin deep in the woods for a long weekend. I wanted to get away from the noise of the city, clear my head, maybe do some writing. The listing online looked cozy, rustic, but comfortable. The pictures showed a fireplace, a small porch, and acres of forest in every direction. When I arrived, it was even more isolated than I expected. The gravel road to the cabin was so overgrown, I almost thought I'd taken a wrong turn. By the time I parked and stepped inside, the sun was dipping behind the trees, casting the place in shadow. It smelled like old wood and dust. There were no neighbors, no cell service, no Wi-Fi. Just me, the cabin, and the endless woods. The first night was uneventful. I made a fire, cooked a simple meal, and read until I got sleepy. But sometime around 3 a.m., I woke up suddenly. Not to a sound exactly, more like the absence of sound. The forest had gone completely silent. No crickets, no wind, not even the creak of the old cabin settling. just this thick, suffocating quiet. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, straining to hear anything. And then it came. A slow, deliberate knock on the front door. 3 heavy raps. I froze. I hadn't told anyone where I was going. No one knew I was there. After a minute, the knock came again. Louder. I forced myself out of bed and grabbed the heavy flashlight I'd brought. My hands were shaking as I crept to the front door. The porch light barely worked, flickering on and off. But in those flashes, I saw nothing but empty woods. "Hello!" My voice cracked when I called out. No answer. I locked the door and backed away. That's when I heard footsteps. Slow, crunching footsteps circling the cabin. They moved from the porch to the side windows, pausing now and then, as if whoever it was peering inside. I shut off the lights, crouched down, and held my breath. The footsteps dragged on for what felt like hours, until finally they faded into the distance. The next morning, I tried to convince myself I'd imagined it. Maybe it was an animal. But when I stepped outside, my stomach dropped. There were footprints in the dirt. Bare footprints. They circled the cabin multiple times, stopping at every single window. I should have left right then. But some stubborn part of me wanted to believe I was overreacting. I told myself I'd stick it out one more night. That evening, I built a bigger fire in the fireplace and tried to distract myself with my notebook. But as midnight approached, that same unnatural silence fell over the woods again. Not a sound, not even the crackle of the fire. Then, without warning, the fireplace went out. One moment it was blazing, the next it was nothing but cold ash. And in that sudden darkness, I heard whispering. Not outside, inside. It was coming from the bedroom. I crept down the hall with my flashlight. The beam shook in my trembling hand. When I pushed open the bedroom door, the whispering stopped. The room was empty, but written on the fogged-up window, in long, smeared letters, were the words, "You shouldn't be here." I ran. I didn't pack, didn't lock the door, didn't even look back. I drove all night until I reached the nearest town. When I called the rental company the next morning to demand an explanation, the woman on the line went silent for a long time. Then she said quietly, "That property isn't listed anymore. It hasn't been for years. I still don't know what I stayed in that weekend, but I know I'll never go back. And sometimes, late at night, I wake up to the sound of slow, deliberate knocking, as if something followed me home."